So some of those principles are keeping a live root in the soil, keeping the ground covered, reducing tillage, having large diversity in what's growing in the soil, so as opposed to like monocropping and such. So he's kind of in the middle also. So we view ourselves further to the natural side than that. With organic certification, that's a big area on the spectrum, but it's more on the natural side, mimicking nature. So anybody familiar with permaculture methods? So permaculture. So that's more on the natural side of studying and mimicking nature and working with nature instead of against nature. So there's three ethics of permaculture: earth care, people care, fair share. And then there's 12 principles of permaculture. So we'll talk about some of those principles and some of the specific things that we're doing on the farm in that area. So when I'm trying to lead over to the weed control side of the topic. So where in nature do you see bare soil? You don't, unless there's a big disturbance. A fire, a landslide, a flood, trampling, some disturbance. So that's the only time that you see bare soil. So, however, if yield is not your top priority, and you're trying to work with nature instead of against nature, and you don't really believe my mother's concept that any weed is the enemy, then there's a whole series of questions come up. Why are you fighting the weeds? If you get to that point in your thought process, what are the reasons left to do weed control? So for harvesting, ease of harvesting, that's a good reason. For aesthetics, to have a nice looking garden, that's important to a lot of people. That's not very important to us, but it is important to a lot of people. A lot of people take great pride in having that perfect garden, and they show their neighbors or friends or family and such. That's not really one of our things. So we're losing, on this farm, we're losing reasons to do strict weed control. So with our harvesting crew, Michelle and the staff that we have here, they'll step into that garden over the weeds and such, and with long pants on and not wearing shorts with tennis shoes and such, and go in there and just come out with a really great yield still, but it's more difficult to harvest. And they have to have a higher skill level in going in and picking what they want. So there's trade-offs. So I'm laying out a lot of different concepts here, but I'm building up to our experience here. That many years ago, we tried to do very strict weed control, and we're losing reasons why we need to do that. And we're accepting the fact that we'll probably have somewhat lower yield, but the quality of the product at the end, we believe, is as high as we've ever had in terms of nutrition and flavor. So, and I attribute that to Mother Nature's contributions of the microbiome, the fungal level. How many of you have seen the video of how trees talk to each other? You guys familiar with that video? It went viral a couple of years ago. But through the microbiome, they've discovered that plants and trees talk to each other very much. So what do they talk about? I don't think they say, "Hey Joe, how's the weather over there?" I think they do more of, something is attacking me. The aphids are attacking me, and I'm going to produce this chemical to try to fight them. And that goes through the network, and the plant over there that is completely separate picks up on that message and starts producing those chemicals in a proactive way to fight aphids, and things like that happen. So there's a lot of research that is recent research that's coming out to go that direction. Is it scientific by like a land-grant university research project? Questionable in those areas, but there's still evidence coming out that plants communicate. about the hardships that they endure. So what kind of hardships do vegetable plants endure? Droughts, weeks of 100-degree plus weather, huge downfall, rain events, hail, wind, trampling, all these hardships that they have to endure. And how do you make the plant the most resilient to those hardships? I believe that keeping that network undisturbed for communication of the fungal level and the microbiome is one of them. Having diversity of plants so that the ground is completely covered and you have more shade, you have less evaporation, more moisture retention, and fighting diseases and molds and insect problems and weather problems. So I believe there's a lot of benefit to weeds. So another thing I've been asking myself in the last several years, whenever I see a weed, and my first instinct is thinking like my mother did, oh, I got to get that weed out of here. I try to think, well, what's the benefit that weed is providing? So I've gotten to the point that like creeping Jenny has a lot of benefit. It is so resilient to drought. The roots go, 12, 15 feet down for creeping Jenny. And to some degree, I'm trying to find research where it mines moisture and nutrition up and kind of shares it with all the friends around it. I haven't really found that yet, but I suspect that might happen with some of these plants. Canada thistle and other types of thistle. We've been at war with Canada thistle to a large degree out here, but I believe that Canada thistle is put there by Mother Nature, and it germinates and spreads because the conditions are right. And I believe that Canada thistle has a job to do in repairing the soil. And when it's done with that job, it goes away, and other generations, other types of plants come in. When we start our walk, I'll talk about first generation pioneer plants and second generation pioneer plants. So first generation pioneer plants are, like, after a ground disturbance, Canada thistle pops up, and it has a job to do. And the conditions were right for Canada thistle to pop up because nothing else was there, and it thrived. But then you have other generations of plants that come in. So I've got a good story about the 40 acres next to us. When we walk up there, I'll get into that a little bit more. But every weed, every might be a strong word. A lot of weeds have advantages to your gardening. So we've really transitioned from my mother's method to what we're going to see up there today. And it's a bit of a jungle.
When weeds talk.
When weeds.
Yeah. It doesn't have any photos in, so you just have to read. But it has every weed listed in there and why that weed is in your soil or on your property.
I have that book. I should have brought it.
I've got it. I can go back.
I don't think it's in print anymore. It was hard. It's very hard to get.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
It's really good though because it will say your soil is compacted,
It is. Yep.
or
I know
you've
what
got
you're
your
talking
soil
about,
is heavy on this,
Yep.
or and it's like, oh, okay, then it starts making sense of.
So the point of that book is telling you that if you have this weed, here's the conditions that existed in order for that weed to thrive. The different chemistry of the soil, the compactness, moisture levels, things like that. And that's why it's there. What that book falls a little bit short on is explaining the benefit of some of those weeds. So that weed is there to fix a problem, a misbalance of conditions that's going on. So I think that we as humans have a lot to learn yet about truly healthy soil conditions and such. We're just scratching the surface. So microbiome, and I'm guessing you've studied that much deeper than I have probably, and have a lot to say. Cover crops, we've done quite a bit with cover crops. We can talk about that more up there. And we've got a couple of garden plots up there where we probably would have planted cover crop, but as an experiment, we let go completely to nature. So we'll see up there. And you guys tell me if you think that the farmer could have made better decisions on selection of cover crop seeds and the tillage to get them to take and what other inputs to get the cover crops to grow versus what Mother Nature did up there. So before I forget about it, let's talk about Canada thistle a little bit more. So of the weeds that we're trying to control on this farm, I would probably say Canada thistle is probably at the top. So some thistles spread by seed and some thistles spread by seed and rhizome. Their roots spread out. Canada thistle is both. So the double-edged sword, it's hard to control that way. So it comes up where the soil's been disturbed, and the thorny, pokey, and like both thistles and stuff have the little spikes on them. So my understanding of one of the reasons why those spikes are there is that when a grazer comes by, a cow or a deer or a horse or something, they want to graze something there, they get poked in the nose, they avoid that area. Because the thistle has a job to do. It's repairing the soil, and it wants all the grazers to be away from there. They don't want any more compaction and trampling. So that's one of the things there. So what's the enemy of Canada thistle besides grazers? The enemy of Canada thistle is shade. So Canada thistle needs somewhere around 60-65% direct sunlight to thrive. If it has less than that percentage of sunlight, it will probably survive, but it won't thrive. And Canada thistle all thistle is really great. Any leaf that is there is photosynthesizing, and I view that as like a solar panel, and sending that energy to the batteries, the roots. So whenever I see Canada thistle here, I chop it with my Dutch hoe, and I got that right over here, prop number 1. Here's my number 1 weed control tool, Dutch hoe, and I sharpen that up every now and then so it's real sharp, and you get real good at just a jab or a scrape or something to get that. So I'm trying to stop all photosynthesis of that weed. And there's other times when it'll be at a place where I know that it's going to sprout up again. What's the saying that you cut a thistle in May, it'll be back the next day. You cut a thistle in June, it'll be back soon. Cut a thistle in July, it's sure to die. Well, if it's early in the summer and I cut a thistle and it's at a place where I'm not going to get back there in a week, I need to cover it with shade somehow. So a lot of times I'll take a 5-gallon bucket. If it's just one or a couple there that fit under the bucket, put the 5-gallon bucket on it, put a rock on top of it, let it sit for a few weeks, and it's gone. Other places we use tarp. So up here we got some places where we have more of an outbreak of Canada thistle, and we have tarps over them. So, yeah. And then we got 2 garden plots, 4 north and 4 south, that we'll walk up there and I've got more information on Canada thistle there. The University of Iowa did a study of deep frequent tillage to get rid of Canada thistle, so we're experimenting with that. So one of the main points is that yield is not our top priority. Our more important objectives are soil health and the nutrition of the vegetables and the flavor of the vegetables. So we're willing to compromise on yields. And a big part of what we're doing here is for future generations also, and thinking through the whole industry and where food production is going, how we're going to feed the population of the earth 80 or 100 years from now with whatever's happening with climate change. That's tied into weed control also, and how we do production. Let me tell you a story about the neighboring property up here as we walk slowly, I guess. Does that work for you? We just keep walking? So our neighbor has that hillside over there beyond where the shed is, and he has like 440 acres down here, and he's not a hands-on engaged land steward. So he lives in California, he's involved with a rally. I don't think he's ever walked his property. I don't think he knows where the property boundaries are. He's never checked the fence. He's never done anything as far as weed control, predator control, pest control. When he first had it, he leased out a big part of it to some of the neighbors for grazing. And that hillside over there got overgrazed. significantly overgrazed, like down to the ground. It was bare soil. So we watched that happen, and since then, I think for the last at least decade or so, I believe that I am the only human being who has set foot on that hillside over there. My dogs and I. So when we do our perimeter walks, sometimes we go over there. So that first couple of years after it was overgrazed, guess what happened? The first generation, the pioneer plants came in. The thistles took over that whole hillside. Canada thistle on that whole hillside. We were scared to death. We thought it's going to destroy our organic farm and it's going to be a disaster. So, so this tool right here saved our farm from being taken over by Canada thistle. So every day when I do perimeter walk, I was out there, mainly along the border. Any Canada thistle comes up, you know, give it a chop and control it to a very high degree. And we can walk over there a little bit closer and see that. So then after a couple of years, then it was just so thick in there. I was just wondering what was going to happen next and what we could possibly do about it. So then the Canada thistle gallfly invades that whole hillside. Are you familiar with that? It's an insect, and it makes a bulb on the stem of each Canada thistle plant, and where it lays its eggs, and it kills the plant.
Well, the fly bores into the stem, and then the plant grows around.
Yeah, yeah. So it ends up killing the plant in the end. So if I had to guess on percentage of infestation there, I would say 80 to 90% of all the Canada thistle was killed within a year or two from that process. So then what comes in next? So then the cockleburs and some of the yarrow stuff came in and stuff like that. The second generation pioneer plants. And they were there to fix the problem of trampling that ground and overgrazing it. And so it's been over a decade now, and when we get up there a little bit closer, we'll look at it. It's pretty nice recovery. There's still problems. There's still cockleburs. When my dogs run through there, I still have to pick a few cockleburs off of them. There's still some thistle there, but maybe 2 to 5% of what was there. It was just, that whole hillside was just complete Canada thistle. So yeah, it was quite the interesting observation. So you let Mother Nature do the repair and play the long game, and I believe you have better result than if a farmer went in there. So if I would have complained to the state or to the neighbor and said, we got this Canada thistle coming up here, what would have happened? They would have sprayed it. So that would be a huge risk to our organic farm. So we did not do it for that reason, and we took the risk of, is it chemicals destroying that hillside, or do we just fight it naturally? So we chose to fight it naturally. In my conclusion, I think Mother Nature did an excellent job of picking the seeds to germinate in those conditions there, and the recovery with a microbiome and the health and the resilience of that whole hillside. So now whenever there's a problem with weather or insect infestation or grasshoppers coming through, that hillside is in such a healthier state than it was prior, and it just got a total reset. So you take that lesson and learn what you can from that lesson, and then start applying it to weed control in your gardens. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. As a little side note here, what we have here, we can come up here a little bit closer up on top here, and I see some thistle in there that went to seed. This is a permaculture swale. So it's basically a ditch on contour of the hillside, running at a 2% grade going downhill. So the purpose of this is to control moisture on this hillside. So typically when we get our snowstorms, say we get 4 inches of snow overnight, typically they come from the northwest down this ridge and hit all the stuff on top of the hill. There's a huge snowdrift across this hillside. So we get 4 inches of snow overnight, it'll be blown scattered here and there, and this hillside will have 6-foot snowdrift going across it. So when that melts, before the swale was here, gravity would take it downhill and it would run off the property, much of it soaking in, but still, relative to the entire farm, a very narrow path of influence and benefit from that moisture. So with a swale, the idea is it'll go into the swale and that moisture will run a long distance at a slow rate, and the absorption into the soil is much higher. So dug this just with my little red tractor up there, and then at first we put cover crop out here. I think we put hairy vetch was the main thing that first year. Yeah. And then we've had mustard out here before. So are you familiar with hairy vetch at all? So it's a legume. So it's a nitrogen fixer. It grows in our conditions out here pretty easy. It has this beautiful purple flower. It'll grow up to a little bit more than hip high on me. And if you just let it be, then the seeds will drop and then you have a crop the following year. But if you want to terminate it, you just cut it or mow it before it goes to seed and it's just gone. So using hairy vetch in a garden situation or in a tree patch or something is one of my favorite things. It comes up tall and it vines around other things. So if you are okay with that condition, hairy vetch is pretty good. Mustard is another one of our favorite cover crops on this farm. Of course, yellow flowers, great for pollinators and such, and good at stabilizing the soil. And it comes up in conditions here. If we get any moisture in the springtime at all, it comes up great. We've tried buckwheat many times with limited success.
Sometimes if we get rain at the right times, it does all right.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of spots where recently we've tried buckwheat and we just didn't get the rain and it just didn't really do anything. Oats.
We've done some with like daikon radish and
I've got a mental block on some of that stuff today. Why today? So anyhow, we first used cover crop to stabilize the soil so it wouldn't wash away for that first couple of years. And then we started planting trees. So you can see some eastern red cedars coming up just on the downhill side. And they've been at war with the goats and the sheep there a little bit, so they're having a tough time. But the plan is that on the downhill side of the swale, we'll continue to plant rows of trees. And slow change is part of permaculture. So we could have done this all like in one month, I suppose, and plant 6 rows of trees and had it all done. But with permaculture, you do one step at a time and you do it slowly and you keep getting your result of the first step before you make decisions for your second step. And keep going with that. So the end result will be multiple rows of trees on the downhill side. Probably many of those will be fruit trees or nut trees, so they'll have those outcomes and benefits. So we'll have more shade, more wind block, less evaporation, more moisture retention. So if any moisture does make it all the way to the end of the swale, it dumps into a stock dam that I have on the other side. So I want to build another swale similar on that hillside over there with the overflow from the stock dam going around that side, and then a couple more on this hillside. So at the bottom, down there on the bottom of our property where all the hay bales are, that's the closest thing that we have to actual cropland. The NRCS considers it cropland. So before the swales, we had one point which the moisture ran through that field. And there's a little low spot down there and it just kind of ran right through. So once I get this all developed, hopefully in my lifetime still, then there will be 4 points of which moisture is entering into that crop field down there. So that's one of the long-term goals. So with climate change, whatever you believe on climate change, I'm here to tell you something is changing. We have a little weather station right over on the hillside over there. I'm kind of a data geek. We've been watching and studying it really closely for a long time. So something is definitely changing. So I'm very concerned about future generations being able to have agriculture on this property later on. So 80 years, 100 years from now, what are they going to be able to grow? Hopefully if I get these swales in place, that'll increase the probability they'll be able to retain enough moisture to grow something. If you listen to the government, they say that in the next 80 years or so, 50 to 80 years, this area of the country will change from semi-arid to arid. And the moisture that we do receive will be reduced, and it'll be concentrated over a shorter period of time. So over like 3 months of the year, we'll get all of our annual moisture. Then 9 months will be essentially drought. So if you take a look from the year 2000 till today, it's already trending that direction pretty strongly. So for the last 5 to 7 years, after the 4th of July, we have received hardly any moisture. So this rain that we got last night was quite unusual for us, really. So we got 7/10 of an inch. So moving along, any questions about the permaculture swale? All right. So up here we have our goats and our dogs, and we'll just stop in here super brief. That you can't have a garden and without inputs for nutrition. So we didn't really even consider chemical fertilizers and such. And Michelle can tell some stories on the background there. But we quickly realized we had to have manure and compost as our main nutrition going back into the soil. So we had to have goats, sheep, poultry. That's just part of our gardening process. So the gardens came first, and these other endeavors came after that for the benefit of the soil. So here we have our goats. When we muck this out and clean it all out, that goes into our compost. And that's one of the sources of nutrition. So if you're going to have gardens and you're not going to have chemical inputs, that means you're probably going to have manure and compost. And if you're going to have manure, you got to have some kind of livestock. Michelle and I didn't grow up in agricultural settings, so we didn't learn from our parents about keeping cattle or keeping that. So having small ruminants is within our skill level. Having large ruminants, we sometimes have cattle, but we don't right now. We don't breed cattle or anything like that. That's a little bit outside of our skill area. So we don't have that manure from cattle coming in, like a lot of families do. So small ruminants has been a good fit for us, and poultry. So if you're going to have small ruminants in an area like this with coyotes and mountain lions and such, then you're probably going to have protection for your livestock. So the livestock guardian dogs. So our compost pile, we do the slow composting method. So with organic certification, it is possible. They have standards for organic certified compost, but it's so difficult to attain that certification that there's only a few places in the United States that really do it. So we do slow composting method. With a fast composting method, you get your ratio of inputs. So you want nitrogen and carbon. So nitrogen, 1 part of that to about roughly 20 parts carbon is the general ratio. And you can play with that back and forth a little bit. So what are some things that have nitrogen? So manure, anything that's green. If you have grass clippings while they're green, that's nitrogen. If you let them sit and they turn brown, then they've lost their nitrogen to the atmosphere. So anything that's green, clean out from the goat shed, the chicken shed, and anything with manure and stuff like that, that's high nitrogen. Things with carbon, anything that's brown, hay. For us, we start off with old hay, big round bales of hay that are a couple years old. They don't have much protein value to the livestock, and that's the main source of carbon for us. So this pile was much larger. It spanned this whole area here. And so with a fast composting method, you get your inputs in place, then you also need moisture, and it needs to be an aerobic process. So it needs to be turned and aerated. So you can do it in roughly 15 days if you can turn it every day, and you make you measure your temperatures, and you got to get it up to at least 135 for a minimum. 145 is better. 155 is getting a little on the hot side. You get to 165 and you kind of sterilized it. So we shoot for 145, 150. And if you can maintain that temperature for 15 days and keep it aerated, turning it, you can make compost in a short period of time. We don't do it like that. When I have a full pile in place, it takes me a whole day with the tractor to turn it. When I say turn it, I say move it from there to there. And then the next time I move it back from there to there. So we do it like over a year's time. So we have all our inputs, a huge pile here. And at first, the first few days, it might stink from the nitrogen and such. After the first week, if it still smells bad, then you probably have too much nitrogen. So you need to add more carbon, or something different needs to happen there. If it doesn't heat up enough, then you don't have enough nitrogen. So you can control the temperature by the ratio, and you can control the odor by the temperature. So you use those two measurement terms to monitor how your compost is doing. So we can look at this a little bit closer here. And so I don't consider this absolutely finished. I need to turn it once or twice more, but it's really close. If we dig into it a little bit, you can see that's wet on top from the rain. And you dig in a little bit more, then it's dry. You dig in a little bit more, and there's moisture again. So dig in here a ways. So that's not bad compost.
Yeah, it's warm.
Yeah. So I haven't turned it. Michelle, when was the last time I turned it? Has it been a month? So before that, I had it activated, and I kept it really hot, like 145, 150 or so for quite a while, and it decomposes everything. So sometimes when we have an animal that dies on the farm, they go in the compost pile. I usually separate it a little bit at first, and then start a new little pile with a fresh dead animal, and after a few months time of turning it, then it gets mixed in with everything else. So there's a few bones here and there and such. So
Sometimes.
next I want to go back to the east side of the high tunnel real quick, to that one.
So we have some gardens that are working this year and some gardens that are resting this year. These
Wait,
are resting.
let's go look at this field while we're over this close, I guess. I forgot about this. So on the other side of this fence is that story that I was telling you about the neighbor's property. And I'm the only person who's walked on there for at least a decade or so. So let's just go look at the field here, and you guys assess the health of this field and give me your thoughts. Stand it, totally get it. That's money in their pockets. We tend to play the long game where it takes years to solve a problem, and in addition to solving the problem, we're also increasing the health and nutrition. Two benefits. So when you look on the other side of the fence, imagine this was all Canada thistle, this whole triangular piece here. Now you look at it. So down there on the bottom, that darker forage, that's still some kind of cocklebur. But it's hard to find a single thistle in what we're looking at right here. So in comparing a human making the decisions on that land and the inputs and the expense to fix it and try to bring the health back compared to Mother Nature, I'm thinking Mother Nature wins. Did a better job than I could have done. So then I'm taking that lesson and applying it to your gardens. All right, now I want to switch over to the other side of the high tunnel. Actually, I'm sorry to make you guys zigzag. The rotation of crops in your gardens is a key piece of that. So Michelle has this whole map, and tomatoes move from here to here to here to here each year, and what follows it and what's in front of it, and all that kind of stuff. So this is fallow this year. So normally we'd put cover crop in here. So our process would be in the springtime to till it up lightly. And when I say lightly, we have a 6-foot tiller that goes behind the tractor. So A light tilling is when the tiller is moving really slow, but the tractor is scooting along pretty good, and it just kind of takes the soil and flips it a couple of times, and it still leaves big clumps and that type of thing. High tillage for us is with the same device, but the tiller is just thrashing and the tractor is creeping along really slowly. So when we have virgin soil that we're taking from grass into a garden, we just have to thrash it that first time. There's no way around it, getting rid of the grass and the native grasses that have been there for eons. But if it's been tilled the previous year to any degree, then the next spring we'd come in and do that light tillage and then plant cover crop there, so we'd have to purchase that. And we try to get like at least a 3-way mix in diversity with the cover crop seeds normally, to try to kind of avoid monocropping it with cover crop, but sometimes we still do. Like mustard, when we want to harvest some mustard, sometimes we still monocrop that and such, just for ease of harvest. But then having enough moisture to keep that cover crop in place, and then you have to think about how you terminate it so that when you plant it to a garden the following year, you don't have that cover crop coming up. So there's all these decisions and inputs and labor, diesel fuel that you have going into it. So getting back to the One Straw Revolution, that book by that author that I can never pronounce his name, he would say, why are you doing all those things? Consider doing nothing and consider what your outcome is going to be, and compare and contrast the two methods. So we just left it. So what do you notice about this compared to the surrounding area?
It's green.
Ding! Number one, it's green. So it's retaining the moisture. What else? Still some thistle coming up.
It's a lot of diversity in it.
A lot of diversity. So Gabe Brown from North Dakota, he'd like the diversity. So with the density, it's keeping the ground shaded and protected. If we would dig into that, which, remember the Mushroom Festival with those 3 students that had the master's degree in the ecology, they came up there and with a shovel they're digging and counting the worms and all kinds of stuff in there, and they said the soil is beautiful from their conclusion.
This has actually been.
So now what we're trying to do, we might be a little bit behind in our timing here, which is unfortunate for the farmer, but we have these T-posts, the cable that runs from here to there and just loops around and ends over there. We bring the goats out, tether them to the cables, and one goat on each strand of cable, and so they're getting grazing. And one of the first things they go for, of course, is creeping Jenny, then the dock seeds, and then any other seed head that is forming. So a couple of the points here is the input and labor that we have into this is close to zero, and the result of the soil health, I think, is better than if we would have had a cover crop that we would have decided upon instead of Mother Nature. The weeds would have come up regardless of whatever we put in for a cover crop. If you get the cover crop dense enough, it'll choke out and prevent a lot of weeds to some degree, but never 100% in our experience. So with this, I am intentionally trying to sterilize the soil through cultivation. So this was at University from Iowa study of deep frequent tillage. So we had Canada thistle just coming up just rampant in here. So just a couple days ago, we've been working on this all summer, but every couple of weeks I come up here and I till it to some degree. So I took the subsoiler to it first. Subsoiler is just one big shank that goes down 18 inches, and worked it up with that first. Because there's creeping Jenny, there's thistle coming up in here. And then I take the tiller and I thrash it. So I went over this all twice, thrashing it with the tiller to get it like this. I'll do that every few weeks. So I'm intentionally killing the life in the soil right here. So the garden right up there, we went through this process already with it. So the first year you kill it, then the next year you introduce life back to it. You try to get your best cover crop that that will thrive in your conditions. So it's very dry, windy, and with our soil conditions. So that's typically mustard or hairy vetch, some combination of that. The first year, just to get something to cover the soil so it's not blowing away anymore. And then the year after that, another cover crop, more diversity, like a 6-way mix. So we just purchased something from Albert Lee Seed, and I can't remember what the mix was when we did the garden over there for the second year. So then the third year, we planted oats, just thick, dense oats, and it came up pretty good. And then I mowed it with a sickle bar, and it made a mat, and then we planted into that for that garden over there. So now that's the squash garden. So did I get all the years? It was just the 3 years. So 3 years totally out of production. And that fourth year you get oats, so more or less out of production. So 4 years out of production. Most ag operations don't have the luxury of being able to have a garden out of production for 4 years. So there again, we're doing the long game. We've got plenty of garden real estate. We have that luxury here. So then when it comes back, there's a few thistles that still persisted after 4 years time over there. So you can see the orange and blue tarp over on that far side there, covering them up. So that's what we're doing as an experiment here. Questions, comments? Angela's studying this over. I can tell gears are turning. What are your comments?
One, that this was the last one that we planted this year. And right now, it's hard to tell what's going on in there because there's a lot of non-cash crop, but it's actually a greens garden. And so we've got some chard over here that's really weeded in, and then under the cover we had, I don't know if it was deer or what it was, that was rabbits. We got a lot of rabbits this year that were coming in, and as soon as the lettuces and such were coming up, the midsummer lettuces, they were eating them down. So one of my high school helpers, who's been out here for a couple years helping, asked if he could just cover where they were seeded. So now what we're doing is we're just watering under this agribon or row cover and letting the weeds and everything come up with the drip irrigation under there. And then thankfully with these couple days of rain we've gotten, I and one or two of my helpers can go in and just start weeding and get back to the chard and the lettuces that are under there, and it's going to be a lot of work. So normally this is like, greens like this are pretty much the only thing that we just plant into the soil without some sort of weed barrier now, because I mean, you can just, you can, if I'm planting into plastic or to weed barrier cloth or something like that, you're going to have your holes that you're planting into, so you're not going to have solid rows of greens. And when I harvest, I like to just go and cut off, leave a couple inches and cut off the top from there and do my greens, my salad mixes, and then let them come back and grow again. And so we can get a good 5 weeks or so of harvest off of a single lettuce plant or whatever that way. So this is the worst, I think. And I'm kind of not looking forward to it, but I also kind of like getting in there and just weeding sometimes by hand. And so as long as the plant's coming up tall enough like the chard is, then we can differentiate, and I can have 2 or 3 different people help me and obviously identify, oh yeah, this is chard, this is weed, and just hand weed it out. And I see one of those buffalo burrs in there too. So we'll get that out of there first. So this is like worst case scenario, I think, and I don't like it, but for some crops it is what this year. And so you can see the onions are planted into plastic. These over here, so I think this is beets and carrots. So Martin and Blake planted those. And then there's a lot of volunteer tomatillas coming up in there. If you ever plant tomatillas, in a garden, you will always have tomatillas in that garden for years forward. And so for like the first 5 years I did rotations, I planted tomatillas in a different garden each year with my rotation. So now I have tomatillas in most gardens, just volunteer. If they get to go, and if whoever's weeding identifies, oh, that's a baby tomatilla, then I say just leave it. Then we don't have to plant tomatillas anymore. So we'll get a few tomatillas out of there.
Never a flower. She can't ever have flowers.
Well, and obviously the sunflowers, you see sunflowers everywhere here. And if they're not shading something that needs to have full sun, I leave them because the pollinators love them. And then the little goldfinches absolutely love those sunflowers. So those little goldfinches come flying in and utilize those sunflowers quite a bit. So then I have beets, carrots. Those are not into plastic, but we seed them really thick. And so they come up, like a bush basically of carrots. And then I don't thin when they're tiny, when they're itty bitty seedlings. I wait until they're basically baby carrots. And then we go in and we thin out the baby carrots and sell those as bundles of baby carrots. And then let the others keep growing. And so we just keep doing that until we're down to our final bigger fall carrots. So I was just saying that I don't thin carrots as tiny seedlings. It kills me to pull a seedling that's gonna be something. I just can't do it. So over the years I've just learned, like I will use my time to go in there and thin through the forest of carrots. And then so we'll just always have some baby carrots, and then we'll have some that are progressively getting more room to grow into larger carrots. Now, if you don't have the time to do that, I understand. Do your seeding better, space them apart better. But I just seed really thick, and I do the same with beets. So then we have baby beets, and we thin those out and sell them as baby beets, and then we let the bigger ones, the others, grow until they're bigger. And so it works out pretty well, and that really kind of chokes out the weeds as well, except just the little walkways in between. And every now and again I just pull those and lay them back down. So I don't really haul weeds out of the gardens for the most part. I just pull them, lay them down, and just use them in the walkways then. And that holds the moisture then.
So with the economic formula of all your expenses that go into it, of products, time, labor, everything, compared to what you get out of it, our formula is different than a lot of other places. So a lot of other places would spend much more time with the seeding and thinning and weeding.
Yeah.
And we spend minimal time with that, and especially the weeding part is almost zero. We realize that we get a lower yield, but that formula is different with your in your revenue versus your expenses with that.
So that works for me. It's not going to work for everyone. And then as we go on, so these are all onions here, and I wish I had pulled the plastic before the rain, because all the onions need to be pulled now and just let them dry. And so now we're probably going to have some kind of rotten onions in there, but we've taken a lot of onions out of here already. And so what we get from this point forward is just bonus onions. And then we've got that section down there, and I'll probably put onions back into the high tunnel again for this fall. And so I plant onions. Well, actually we just pulled that out the other day, and Martin didn't need that one, so it just got left there. So we forgot it. I plant onions both from seed as well as sets. And I just in the last couple of years have found a company where I can order organic onion sets. And so now we do both onions transplants from seed that we've started early in the year, as well as the onion sets, which go really fast. And the sets are just super easy to do into the plastic. And we can use the plastic, if we pull it up carefully, we can use it about 3 years before we have to throw it away. And that's like $7 for a 50-foot length, or maybe it's longer than that. Maybe it's 100-foot length, 3 feet wide through Runnings or somewhere like that. And so I try to use plastic over as much as possible, but it does save on man hours later down the road. And so then this is potatoes over here, and this is just an old hay tarp that I just went along and burned holes into. And so when we plant our potatoes, we lay out the drip line, and then we we lay out the tarp. So this was one of the first times I burned holes into anything for planting. They're not straight. There's no rhyme or reason to how I did it, because I don't string line things like some of us here do. So so getting the drip tape to line up underneath is always a bit of a challenge. But basically you lay your drip tape, lay your tarp, and then and we will have worked the soil up beforehand. And then we go and have a crew, and somebody's cutting potatoes and somebody else is pushing them, or several people are just pushing them into the holes, into the soft soil. And I don't actually hill up potatoes. So we don't get as good of production out of our potato gardens as we could if we just kept hilling them up. But it's really hard. Like, we could do that, but you got the tarp there, and so I don't even know if they would grow if you hilled them up. Like, would you have more on top? Maybe, I don't know. So, and then you've got all that soil on top of your tarp that you have to deal with at the end of the season, which is really, for me, that's the hard part. There's already some on there that just kind of naturally, gets on top of the tarp. So it's a little bit hard. So we basically just, now as we are harvesting, we'll pull the plants off the top, throw those off to the side, and then we just pull the tarp, and the potatoes are just kind of laying on the ground underneath then. And so it's pretty easy harvest. And then we go with a potato fork and just dig the ones that are down underneath too. But it works out pretty well for.
So in the industry, the optimal ratio of pounds of seed potatoes that you plant versus the pounds of potatoes that you harvest, 1 to 10 is the ultimate.
Yeah, if you have perfect soil, like sandy soil and Idaho potatoes and all of that.
We don't know of anybody
I get
gotten close to that.
Well, yeah, around here. I don't know. Some small gardeners do. So, they spend a lot of time on their potatoes. I don't. I like to put them in the ground, and then we watch really closely for potato bugs. So we walk through twice a day and squash potato bugs always, just by hand. But we don't put a lot of time back into potatoes, and the tarp just helps with the weeds. But you can see there's still weeds coming up, but it's like creeping Jenny. So you grab a wad of it, and it's almost a whole row of creeping Jenny comes out of there. So it works pretty good for us. If that was my focus, was potatoes, I'd probably have a more intense system with it. But we have some here. We have some up in the next garden up there too that we planted later on, and we get enough potatoes for our purposes. And it's probably about a 1 to 5 ratio, about 5 pounds for every pound that we plant, something like that. So not great, but it's okay. And then this garden over here, like I said, that was all the root crops there. And then this one over here is a combination. We got some beans on the edge, because I think we didn't really know exactly what we wanted to put on the edge. So I always feel like it was hail protection one day. I had some concerns. I was like, if I only save 10 plants, I'm going to put those out there for tomatoes. So if I have a spot that I just want to get planted, but I don't maybe have a particular thing that I want to put in there, if I still have time to put a legume in, that will always be my choice, because you can always follow a legume rotation with something else the next year. They're always going to be beneficial for your soil with the nitrogen they put in. So those are just a late planting of beans there. And then a nice crop of creeping Jenny. I think everybody should appreciate that. But I don't really worry about it. So, as it's coming into my cucumbers, then this week I will probably, when Blake, my high school employee, gets back from his vacation with his family, I'll probably be like, Blake, go out there and get the creeping Jenny away from the cucumbers and the eggplant and the tomatoes. And he'll do that. So if I was doing it all on my own, well, I probably wouldn't do all these gardens if I was doing it all on my own, but then I would have to mitigate creeping Jenny a little bit sooner and a little bit faster. But I would rather be out here walking on creeping Jenny on a day like this when it's muddy than be hauling soil out of the garden on my boots. So that's kind of part of it too. Cucumbers, they're doing pretty well. My experience has been with trellising versus on the ground. For me, they produce better on the ground than they do when they're trellised. But I still give it a shot with different variety each year. So those down there are like an English style that are just starting to produce a little bit. And then these are a combination of slicers and picklers. And then eggplant into the plastic works pretty well for the eggplant. And then tomatoes, we just do straight into the soil, just do the panels as our trellising system because our wind with the weight of the plants is it's just too much for a lot of other trellising systems that I've tried over the years. And so I just like the T-posts and the cattle panels because we have those here anyway. If I decide I don't want to do it again, we'll use them for some other purpose with the livestock and fencing. And so we just, this system has worked pretty well for me for a lot of years. And we do mostly indeterminate tomatoes. In this row over here, I have some that are semi-determinate or something like that, so they won't go very tall. And it's like keep tying them up to the trellis is a lot of labor, and then we just hand pull weeds because we're going to be in the tomato garden so many times to tie the tomatoes and to harvest them. Then we just hand pull the weeds at the base of the trellises or we mow through. Yeah, we just take the push mower and just mow right through. And so yeah, I could do that over maybe with the root crop garden too, do a little bit of mowing, but
then you get the discharge from the mower as mulch.
And this is not hooked up right now. It's poultry netting, electric netting. It's purely so that if my turkeys fly out, I have 3 of them, they can't immediately go into there. It just dissuades them for a little while. So it's just turkey and or if a chicken gets out of the pen or whatever, then they don't just go right in. And because they like to peck a hole in every colorful tomato they see, not just 1 or 2.
Then we have the round bales of hay here.
And that's just a windbreak. Because these gardens, especially the last couple up here on this side, get some really heavy winds out of the northwest. And so I try to help out. We had the bales over around the peas when we had the spring peas growing just to provide windbreak for them. And then when the peas were done and we were putting the tomatoes in, then Rick just brought the bales over here for the windbreak here.
The bales really change the little micro.
They do.
Environment as far as temperature,
Yeah.
and moisture retention and wind.
So I plant my tomatoes pretty close together, like 15, 18 inches apart, which is really close, but we have a very windy ridge up here. So I'm not so concerned about mildews and that sort of thing in our garden. If your garden is a lot more protected, then I would space things about quite a bit more apart. So something that I've learned over the years is that in the spring, when we're planting out little transplants into these gardens with the winds we get, is I'm going to let some weeds stay in there because they actually buffer the little transplants from the wind. And so I'm going to let some weeds stay until a certain point, and then we go and just pull them up as the plants get stronger and their stems are stronger. Then I will take some of those weeds out. But as you can see, I don't worry a lot about weeds. I really don't. We go and we mow, we do some pulling. Next week it's going to look exactly like it did this week, and so we determine, like, is it harming the crop? Is it making it, like when I'm trying to pull the cash crop out, is it being broken off because of the creeping Jenny or something? And lots of times what we'll do is we'll just go and trim the creeping Jenny too and not actually pull it off of the trellises and that sort of thing, because it's going to cause more damage to pull it off than it is to just let it die on the trellis. So, and then up here I just have some more beans, and those are all planted into plastic. And then the peas that are finished, and we're just letting them dry out so we can keep the seed for next year's peas again.
So my mother would take a look at this garden and just walk me up the side of the head and say, "This is just crazy."
Well, she would say, "Michelle, don't you want to weed?" So she was Polish, so she sounded a little Polish when I say it. But she would say, "Don't you need to get those weeds out of there?" And I would just say, "No, they're okay, Ann. It's okay." So let's look at the high tunnel next, and then it's probably. Let's come over this way. So if you do a greenhouse, the opaqueness, what's the word I want to use, of the type of cover that you put on makes a huge difference in how warm it gets in your high tunnel, and how bearable it is to be in there in the summer. So I cannot remember what percentage this one is, but I want to say 30% or something like that. We started out with the clear cover, and I did not want to work in here at all in the middle of the summer. So I would grow stuff for a certain amount of time, and then I would just not use it in the hot months, and then I would start replanting about now probably. So like you can see there's some pest issues in here. The kale has got had cabbage moths and cabbage loopers and all of that stuff. I'm at the point, we've harvested and sold so much kale that I'm at the point where well, I mean, they do, but CSA people have had a lot of kale, and yeah, so I'm about ready to trim that down, and I'm not sure. I'll figure it out here this week. But certain crops that do really well in here, I realized, are peppers. I used to always have peppers outside, and the wind was just so hard on them. So we put all of the peppers inside now. So this is kind of our second planting, is when we put the peppers in. Before, we had all greens in here for the spring, and we probably planted in about March 1st or something like that. And then the tomatoes that I'm going to use for canning in our commercial kitchen here, I like to put those in here. And part of the reason is that like the Romas and the paste tomatoes and such do pretty well in here. Some tomatoes are outside though, so we have, if there's a big hail, I'd still have these as a backup plan for the canning and such. Also, I probably won't really have time to really get into canning until it starts cooling down outside. And so these will still be going in here when the outside tomatoes are finishing up because of the cool weather out there. So I can kind of push back my personal canning season a little bit. And then if you want to do super hot peppers at all, like scorpions, habaneros, that sort of thing, it's really beneficial to have some sort of a greenhouse to grow them in, because they need like 110 days. And so then you have that longer season. When you have a really long, cool spring, they're not really doing anything in the outside garden anyway. So we have a combination of sweet peppers in here, and then like poblanos, and then some of these super hots that are pretty small, but they'll shoot up here pretty good, and they're kind of interspersed here and there. And I grow those specifically for a guy that rents our kitchen to make hot sauce. And so he'll use all of those, and everybody else just needs one super hot pepper at a time. He goes through quite a few of them. And I have some okra in the back, so like our midsummer crops. So to get back to weeding though, finally I decided that I'm going to do the weed barrier cloth in here. I used to do some just soil. This in the middle doesn't have weed barrier over it, and I think Martin just worked it up with the, what's it called? These broad fork, yeah. Just worked it up with the broad fork and reseeded this into some fall cool season greens. And then he threw the cloth over just to keep that moisture in there. And but otherwise, this will be like our third planting then of the season, are these things that are under the white cloth. And we might do, it's probably about it. I probably do about 3 plantings in here a year, and that's about it. But the weeds are so much more we can take care of them very handily when we just have this weed barrier cloth overlapping the whole thing. And I might even do it. The only reason we didn't do it down the middle is sometimes we like to plant peanuts. And peanuts have to go down, they bloom, and then they have to go down and touch the soil to form the peanut. And so if you have them in weed barrier, they can't form the peanut. And so I left it open for that purpose. But I could just put another strip of weed barrier down here, burn the holes in it, get it laid down, and go ahead and have our plantings into weed barrier other than something like peanuts. But you'll see there are a couple thistles popping up. There's some creeping Jenny. There's some mallow, various things, but they're really easy to pull and take care of when we go in and start working with those plants. Then we just go in and right after we've watered or while we're watering, go ahead and pull those up. And it's much easier than it was before we started doing the weed barrier. Any questions about anything in here?
Companion plants.
I don't do a lot of, so I have some, because I like flowers. That's always kind of an after when, and I just like them. And in about January, ordering a couple hundred gladiolas seems like a really good idea.
Okay.
And then you have to find a place to put them.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah.
So what's funny is that we planted the glads way before we transplanted in the tomatoes, but now it's like the glads are like, hey, we're still in here. There's a little bit, sometimes I'll have like a row of basil or something running down, or, some other flowers running down the edge. Not as much companion planting in here though, as I would like to do, I guess, but